The Concordat patrol vessel descended through the thin atmosphere of QM7 like a predator that had spotted wounded prey. Commander Thalos stood on the bridge, his compound eyes fixed on the sensor readout that showed 2 signatures on the surface. Below, 1 human vessel of salvage configuration, and 5 Vorak life signs that should not have been alive. He had been tasked with a routine patrol of the quarantine zones. When his ship detected the unauthorized presence, now he understood why his superiors had always been nervous about the Vorak disposal site. Someone had found them. The ship landed 200 meters from the human vessel, and Thalos led a security team of 12 Rexian soldiers down the ramp. They were armed with pulse rifles and shock batons, standard equipment for subduing non-compliant organics, and they moved in precise formation toward the cave system where the life signs were concentrated. What Thalos saw when he rounded the rocky outcropping made him stop in his tracks. A human female was standing at the cave entrance, and behind her, arranged in a protective semicircle, were 5 Vorak. The creatures should have been dead by now. Instead, they were standing on steady legs, their bioluminescent markings glowing with renewed vigor, their golden eyes fixed on the approaching soldiers with unmistakable intelligence. But what truly disturbed Thalos was that they were not attacking. They were waiting, guarding, protecting the human as if she was one of their own. This is wrong, Thalos thought, his mandibles clicking with agitation. This should not be possible. Every report, every study, every piece of data that Concordat had collected on the Vorak said that they could not be controlled, could not be tamed, could not form bonds with any species other than the extinct Cathari. Yet here was a human standing among them, like she belonged there. Thalos stepped forward, his soldiers spreading out behind him in a combat formation. He raised his voice so the human could hear him clearly. "You are trespassing on restricted Concordat territory," he said, his translator converting his clicks and whistles into human speech. "You will surrender yourself for processing, and you will step away from those creatures immediately." The human did not move. "My name is Dr. Una Park," she replied, "and these creatures are under my protection. They were abandoned here to die, and I saved them. I will not let you harm them." Thalos felt a flicker of something that might have been respect, but he crushed it quickly. The law was clear, and his orders were clear. "Those animals are classified as extreme biological hazards," he said. "They are scheduled for termination. Your interference does not change that. Now step aside, or you will be charged with obstruction of Concordat justice." Una shook her head. "They are not animals," she said. "They are intelligent beings who were thrown away because your Concordat was too afraid to try understanding them. I have been living with them for weeks, and they have not harmed me once." "Does that sound like mindless killing machines to you?" The alpha female, the largest of the pack, moved forward to stand beside the human. Thalos watched as the creature pressed her massive head against the human's shoulder in a gesture that was unmistakably affectionate. His soldiers shifted nervously, their weapons raised but uncertain. None of them had ever seen a Vorak behave like this. "Your anecdotal experience does not override decades of documented attacks," Thalos said, but even as he spoke the words he could hear how hollow they sounded. "Those creatures killed 47 handlers before we gave up trying to control them. They are too dangerous to exist. Then why are they not killing me?" Una asked. "Why did they protect me during a storm instead of eating me? Why did the alpha female collapse at my feet and ask for help instead of tearing out my throat?" Thalos had no answer for that. He turned to his second in command and gave a quiet order. The soldiers began to advance. Una stood her ground, but she knew she could not stop them. She was one human with no weapons against 12 armed soldiers. And even with the Vorak on her side, she did not want this to turn into a bloodbath. She was about to surrender, to try negotiating from custody, when Ciara made a sound she had never heard before. It was low and resonant. something between a growl and a howl, and it made the other 4 Voraks snap to attention like soldiers receiving orders before Yuna could react. The pack moved. Minho hit the first soldier before anyone could fire a shot. His crystalline fangs sinking into the Vrexian's weapon arm and wrenching it away with a sound of tearing metal and chitin. Jizu and Taiyang flanked the formation, moving so fast they were almost impossible to track. Striking and retreating before the soldiers could bring their weapons to bear, Hana stayed close to Yuna, her body positioned as a living shield between the human and any stray fire. The Concordat soldiers tried to fight back, but they had been trained to deal with Vorak as individual threats, not as a coordinated pack. They fired their pulse rifles wildly, hitting nothing but rock and dust, while the creatures they had dismissed as mindless animals systematically dismantled their formation. It was over in less than a minute. 8 soldiers were down, wounded but alive, their weapons scattered across the rocky ground. The remaining 4 had retreated behind Commander Thalos, who stood frozen in place with a pulse rifle pressed against his thorax by Minho's massive paw. Siora walked through the carnage with almost casual grace, her golden eyes never leaving Thalos. She stopped in front of him and bared her crystalline fangs, and Thalos understood with perfect clarity that he was about to die. Then Yuna spoke. Siora, stop. The alpha female paused. She turned her head to look at Yuna, and something passed between them. Some wordless communication that Thalos could not begin to understand. Then Siora stepped back, releasing the pressure on his chest, and returned to Yuna's side. Yuna walked forward until she was standing directly in front of Thalos. The Vrexian commander was shaking, his compound eyes wide with what could only be fear. And Yuna felt a grim satisfaction at seeing the tables turn. I could let them kill you, she said quietly, after what your Concordat did to them. I think they would enjoy it, but I'm not going to do that. Do you know why? Thalos shook his head. Because I am human, Yuna said, and humans do not repay cruelty with cruelty. We are better than that. Now take your wounded and leave this moon, and tell your superiors what you saw here today. Thalos gathered his soldiers and retreated to his ship without another word. As the vessel lifted off and broke atmosphere, Yuna watched it go with a heavy heart. She knew this was not over. The Concordat would not let this stand, would not allow a human to embarrass them like this. And they would certainly not allow the Vorak to survive, now that they had proven they could be weaponized. She turned back to her pack. Siora pressed against her, making a low rumbling sound that Yuna had come to recognize as contentment. The other 4 gathered around, their wounds from the brief battle already beginning to heal, thanks to their engineered biology. They were safe for now. But Yuna knew the danger was only beginning. 3 hours later, her ship's communications array picked up a transmission on Concordat military frequencies. She should not have been able to intercept it, but the Wanderer had been modified with some very illegal equipment over the years, and Yuna was not above using every advantage she had. The transmission was from Commander Thalos to Concordat High Command, and what she heard made her blood run cold. The commander was not just reporting her presence and the survival of the Vorak. He was describing her as a threat to galactic security, a human who had somehow weaponized the most dangerous predators in known space. He was recommending immediate orbital bombardment of QM7 to eliminate both her and the Bontours and the pack. The response came within minutes. Concordat battle fleet was being dispatched to the quarantine moon. They would arrive in 6 hours. Yuna looked at Siora, at Minho and Jisu and Taiyang and Hana, at the 5 creatures who had become her family in the span of a few short weeks. We need to run, she said, and the pack seemed to understand, because they followed her without hesitation toward the Wanderer. 6 hours was not much time, but it would have to be enough. Yuna worked through the night, converting her cargo hold into a makeshift medical bay while the 5 Vorak watched her from the cave entrance with wary eyes. She had synthesized a nutrient solution based on what her database told her about Keth-Ari biological engineering, and she had prepared wound treatments for injuries that looked days or weeks old. The hardest part was convincing the creatures to accept her help. The alpha female was still too weak to move. So Yuna started with her. She approached slowly, keeping her movements calm and predictable, speaking in soft tones, even though she knew the Vorak could not understand her words. What mattered was the sound, the intention behind it, the absence of threat in her voice. The other 4 Vorak growled when she got close to their leader, but they did not attack when Yuna knelt beside the alpha and began treating her wounds. The creature tensed but did not resist. Those golden eyes stayed fixed on Yuna's face, watching every movement, assessing every action. And Yuna had the uncomfortable feeling that she was being judged. She cleaned the infected wounds first, applying antiseptic that made the alpha female flinch but not pull away. Then she administered the nutrient solution through a dermal injector, watching as the creature's body absorbed the desperately needed sustenance. By the time she finished, the sun had begun to rise over the barren landscape, and Yuna was exhausted, but she could not stop now. The other 4 Vorak needed treatment too, and she did not know how long any of them would last without help. One by one, she approached each creature and repeated the process. A large male with a torn ear snapped at her hand when she got close, but the alpha female made a sound, something between a growl and a bark, and the male immediately backed down. Yuna filed that observation away for later analysis. The pack hierarchy was still intact, despite their weakened state, and the alpha's authority was absolute. It took 2 full days before all 5 Vorak were stable enough for Yuna to relax. She set up a temporary shelter near the caves, close enough to monitor her patients, but far enough to give them space. The creatures watched her constantly, their golden eyes tracking her every movement. But the hostility was fading. They were beginning to understand that she meant them no harm on the 3rd day. Yuna woke to find the alpha female standing outside her shelter. The creature had regained enough strength to walk. Though she still moved with obvious pain, Yuna sat up slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements. And the alpha female lowered her massive head until her eyes were level with Yuna's. They stayed like that for a long moment. Human and Vorak, predator and prey. And then something remarkable happened. The alpha female pressed her nose against Yuna's palm. It was a gesture of trust, of acceptance, and Yuna felt tears prick at her eyes. She had spent her entire career studying xenobiology, had encountered hundreds of species across dozens of worlds, but she had never experienced anything like this. The galaxy's most dangerous predator had just acknowledged her as something other than food or threat. She named the alpha female Siora, after a word from her grandmother's language that meant something precious and protected. The other 4 she named as she got to know them. Minho, the large male with the torn ear, who was fiercely protective of the pack. Jisoo, a smaller female with markings that glowed brighter than the others. Taiyang, a young male who was the most curious about Yuna's equipment. And Hana, an older female who seemed to serve as Siora's second in command. A week passed, and the Vorak grew stronger. Yuna observed their behavior constantly, taking notes and recording everything she could. What she discovered challenged everything the galaxy believed about these creatures. They were not mindless killing machines. They communicated through complex vocalizations and body language. They showed affection toward each other, grooming and playing in ways that reminded Yuna of the wolves she had studied on Earth as a student. They mourned their dead, returning to the places where their packmates had fallen and making sounds that could only be described as grief. And they were forming a bond with her that should have been impossible on the 10th day. A dust storm rolled across QM7 with almost no warning. Yuna was outside her shelter checking on a piece of equipment. When the sky turned dark and the wind began to howl, she tried to run for her ship. But the visibility dropped to nearly zero within seconds, and she quickly lost her bearings. The temperature was dropping fast, and the dust was getting into her lungs despite her respirator. She was going to die on this rock, she realized. Lost in a storm only 100 meters from safety. Then she felt something warm press against her side. Siora had found her in the storm, tracking her scent through wind and dust that would have blinded any lesser predator. The alpha female pushed against Yuna, guiding her away from her ship and toward the caves where the pack had sheltered. Yuna wanted to resist, wanted to get back to the Wanderer, but she could barely stand against the wind. And Siora was insistent. The cave was dark and cramped, but it was safe from the storm. The other 4 Vorak were already inside, huddled together for warmth, and they made room for Yuna. Without hesitation, she found herself pressed between Siora and Minho, their massive bodies radiating heat, their fur surprisingly soft against her skin. For the first time, she was surrounded by creatures that could kill her in seconds, and she felt completely safe. The storm lasted 6 hours. When it finally passed and Yuna emerged from the cave, she knew that something fundamental had changed. She returned to her ship and ran a complete medical scan on herself, then compared it to the data in her xenobiology archives. What she found made her sit down hard in her pilot's chair. The Cathari had engineered the Vorak with an imprinting mechanism, a genetic trigger that would bond them to their handlers through specific pheromone markers. The Cathari had produced these pheromones naturally, which was why the Vorak had served them so faithfully when the Cathari went extinct. The Concordat had tried to replicate the pheromones artificially, but they had never gotten the formula right. But humans, by some cosmic accident of evolution, produced chemical signatures that were close enough to trigger the bonding response. The Vorak were not choosing to trust Yuna. Their genetic programming was recognizing her as a potential handler, someone they could bond with the way they had bonded with their original creators. It should have made the connection feel less meaningful, but somehow it did not. The Vorak had been engineered to bond, but they had also been abandoned and starved and left to die. They could have attacked her anyway, could have let their instincts override their programming, but instead they had chosen to accept her. The bond was real, even if its origins were artificial. Yuna was still processing this discovery when her ship's sensors detected something that made her blood run cold. A Concordat patrol vessel had just entered the system, and it was heading straight for QM7. She ran to the cave entrance where the pack was resting after the storm. Siora lifted her head at Yuna's approach, immediately sensing the human's distress. The other Vorak rose to their feet, their bioluminescent markings beginning to pulse with agitation. They did not understand what was coming, but they understood fear. And they understood that their human was afraid. Yuna looked at the 5 creatures who had become her responsibility, her pack, and she made a silent promise whatever happened next. She would not let the Concordat take them. She would not let them finish what they started. The Vorak had been abandoned once, but they would not be abandoned again. The transport ship descended through the thin atmosphere of QM7, a barren moon that the Galactic Concordat had designated as a dumping ground for problems they did not want to solve inside the cargo hold. 12 massive creatures paced in their containment fields, their bioluminescent markings pulsing with agitation, their crystalline fangs gleaming under the harsh lights. These were the Vorak, engineered war beasts created by the now extinct Cathari Empire. And today they would be abandoned to die. Commander Velthas of the Rexian species stood on the bridge and watched the moon grow larger on the view screen. His compound eye showed no emotion as he gave the order to Worst to prepare for release. The Vorak had been a problem for the Concordat ever since they inherited them from the fallen Cathari, and every attempt to control or study them had ended in blood. 47 handlers dead in 3 years. Velthos thought. And not a single successful bonding. The creatures were simply too dangerous to keep, but too valuable to destroy outright. At least according to the politicians who made such decisions from the safety of their distant capitals. So, instead they would be released on this dead moon with minimal supplies. And nature would take its course. The Concordat called it managed population reduction. Velthos called it what it was: execution by starvation. The ship landed on a rocky plateau, and the cargo ramp lowered with a mechanical hiss. One by one, the containment fields deactivated, and the Vorak emerged into the pale light of the distant sun. They moved like shadows given form, each one standing nearly 2 meters tall at the shoulder, their fur dark as space itself except for the glowing lines that traced patterns across their bodies. The alpha female was the last to leave the ship. She paused at the top of the ramp and turned her head to look back at the crew, her golden eyes holding an intelligence that made even Velthos uncomfortable. Then she descended and joined her pack on the barren ground. The ramp closed, and the transport lifted off without ceremony within minutes. It had broken atmosphere and jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Vorak alone on a moon with nothing but rocks and dust and the slow approach of death. The alpha female, the largest of the pack, surveyed their new prison with cold calculation. She could smell the absence of prey, could feel the wrongness of this place in her bones. The Cathari had made her kind to be perfect hunters, perfect killers. But there was nothing here to hunt and nothing here to kill. She gathered her pack and led them toward a series of caves she had spotted during the descent. They would need shelter from the temperature extremes, and they would need to conserve their strength. Already she could feel the hunger beginning to gnaw at her insides. 3 weeks passed on QM7, and the Vorak began to die. The smallest of the pack went first, a young male who had never fully recovered from the stress of captivity. Then 2 more fell to starvation, their bodies too weak to continue. The survivors turned on each other as desperation took hold, fighting over scraps of nothing, drawing blood in conflicts that served no purpose except to hasten their end. By the end of the 4th week, only 5 Vorak remained. The alpha female held her pack together through sheer force of will. But even she was fading. Her ribs showed through her matted fur, and her bioluminescent markings had dimmed to barely visible traces. She had stopped eating entirely, giving what little food they found to the others. And she knew she would not last much longer. It was on the 29th day that something changed. The alpha female was lying in the cave entrance, conserving what little energy she had left, when her ears detected a sound she had not heard in weeks: the rumble of a ship entering atmosphere. She lifted her head and watched as a small vessel descended from the sky. Nothing like the Concordat transport that had brought them here. This ship was battered and worn, covered in patches and repairs, clearly built for function rather than appearance. It landed on the plateau where they had been released, and the alpha female forced herself to stand. She did not know if this newcomer was friend or enemy, but at this point, it hardly mattered. Anything was better than waiting. To die, Dr. Una Park had been salvaging components from a derelict station 3 systems away when her scanners picked up the transport signal. The designation QM7 had appeared in her database as a quarantine moon. Restricted access, no life permitted. But her sensors told a different story. There were life signs down there, faint but unmistakable. And Una had never been good at ignoring creatures in need. She guided her ship, the Wanderer, down through the thin atmosphere and landed on what looked like a natural plateau. Her scanners showed the life signs concentrated near a cave system about 200 meters away, and she grabbed her medical kit before heading for the airlock. The moon's atmosphere was thin but breathable, and Una stepped out into the pale light with her hand resting on the stun pistol at her hip. She was not expecting trouble, but she had learned long ago that the galaxy rarely cared about expectations. she walked toward the caves, her boots crunching on the rocky ground, and that was when she saw them. 5 massive creatures emerged from the shadows, their dark fur hanging loose on emaciated frames, their golden eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Yuna froze in place, her mind racing through every xenobiology database she had ever studied. And then the recognition hit her like a physical blow. These were Vark. She had read about them in classified reports she was not supposed to have access to, had seen the footage of what they could do to armed soldiers, had studied the complete failure of every attempt to domesticate or control them. They were supposed to be the most dangerous predators in known space, and she was standing in front of 5 of them with nothing but a stun pistol that would probably just make them angry, but they did not attack the largest one. Clearly, the Alpha walked toward her with slow and deliberate steps. Yuna could see the creature's ribs through her fur, could see the way her legs trembled with each movement, and something in her heart broke at the sight. This was not a monster. This was a mother who had watched her pack die around her, who had given everything she had to keep the survivors alive, and who had finally run out of strength. The alpha female stopped a meter away from Yuna and looked at her with those golden eyes. And Yuna saw something there that she had never expected to see in a Vark. Hope. Then the massive creature collapsed at her feet. Yuna dropped to her knees beside the fallen Vorak, her medical training taking over as she assessed the creature's condition. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, multiple infected wounds, and parasites that her scanner could barely identify. The other 4 Vorak watched from a distance, too weak to threaten her and too desperate to flee. They were all dying. Yuna realized, and they knew it. She looked at the alpha female lying before her, this magnificent creature that the galaxy had declared too dangerous to live. And she made a decision that would change everything. She was going to save them. She did not know how, and she did not know what would happen next. But she knew that she could not walk away. The Concordat had left these creatures to die because they were afraid of what they could not control. But Yuna had never let fear make her decisions for her. She stood up and walked back to her ship, already planning what she would need behind her. The alpha female opened one golden eye and watched the human go, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps death was not inevitable after all. The cargo hold of the Wanderer had never been designed to carry passengers, let alone 5 massive predators who each weighed more than Yuna did. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and Yuna had cleared out everything non-essential to make room for her pack. Getting the Vorak onto the ship was easier than she had expected. Siora went first, climbing the loading ramp with the caution of a creature who had never been inside a vessel voluntarily. The others followed their alpha, trusting her judgment even when it led them into the metal belly of an alien machine. Yuna sealed the cargo hold and ran to the cockpit, her fingers flying over the controls as she prepared for launch. The Concordat fleet would be here in less than 5 hours now, and she needed to be long gone before they arrived. The Wanderer lifted off from QM-7 with a shudder that made the old ship groan in protest. Yuna pushed the engines harder than she should have, climbing through the thin atmosphere and breaking into the black void of space. For a moment, she allowed herself to hope that they might actually escape. Then her sensors lit up with contacts. The Concordat had not waited for the full battle fleet to arrive. 3 patrol vessels had been stationed in a nearby system, and they had jumped in to establish a blockade around the moon. Yuna watched as they deployed a sensor net, a web of detection buoys that would track any ship trying to leave the area. She ran the calculations in her head, but the numbers refused to cooperate. The Wanderer was fast for a salvage ship, but it could not outrun military patrol vessels. Her weapons were minimal, enough to deter pirates, but nowhere near enough to threaten Concordat warships. And even if she somehow managed to evade the blockade, She would need to find a safe harbor, somewhere the Concordat could not follow, for humans operating illegally in Concordat space. Such places were rare and closely guarded secrets. She was still calculating her options when her communications array crackled to life. Unidentified human vessel. This is the Concordat patrol ship Righteous Fury. You are ordered to power down your engines and prepare for boarding. Failure to comply will result in your immediate destruction. Juna did not respond. She knew there was nothing she could say that would change their minds. And every second she spent talking was a second she could spend looking for a way out. She studied the sensor net, looking for gaps, weaknesses, anything she could exploit there, she thought. Spotting a slight irregularity in the coverage pattern, one of the buoys had drifted out of position, probably damaged during deployment. And there was a window just large enough for a ship her size to slip through. The problem was that the window was on the far side of the blockade, and reaching it would require flying directly through the patrol vessels. Firing arcs, she would be exposed for at least 30 seconds. More than enough time for their weapons to reduce the Wanderer to scattered debris. She was about to attempt it anyway when a second signal came through on her. Communications array. This one was on an encrypted frequency that only humans used. A channel that the Concordat had never managed to crack. Salvage vessel Wanderer. Came a voice that sounded rough and weathered with age. This is the free trader Starbound. I have been monitoring Concordat communications, and I know what you are carrying. I can help. Una hesitated. Trust did not come easily to her, especially not from strangers who appeared at convenient moments. But she was running out of options. Who are you? She asked. And why would you help me? The name is Dowan. The voice replied, and I am helping because you are human. Because the Concordat is about to murder one of our own over some animals they were too scared to handle themselves. Is that not reason enough? Una thought about it for exactly 2 seconds. What did you have in mind? She asked. Dowan's plan was simple, which meant it was either brilliant or suicidal. His ship, the Starbound, was larger and faster than the Wanderer, and he was willing to use it as a distraction. He would engage the blockade in a series of harassing maneuvers, never committing to a real fight but forcing the Concordat to divide their attention while they were focused on him. Una would make for the gap in the sensor net. It might work, Una thought. Or it might get us both killed. She looked back toward the cargo hold, where she could hear the Vorak moving restlessly. They could sense her tension, her fear, and they were responding to it the only way they knew how, by preparing for battle. But this was not a battle they could fight with fangs and claws, and Una needed to keep them calm. She made her decision. All right, Dowan, she said. Let us do this. The Starbound came out of nowhere, dropping out of hyperspace directly between the Wanderer and the nearest patrol vessel. Dowan was good, Una had to admit, as she watched him dance his ship through a barrage of weapons fire, always staying just ahead of the targeting systems, always keeping the Concordat guessing about his next move. He was buying her time, and she intended to use every second of it. Una pushed the Wanderer toward the gap in the sensor net, her engines screaming in protest. One of the patrol vessels broke off to intercept her, but Dowan was there, cutting across its path and forcing it to change course. The blockade was falling apart. Just as he had predicted, she was almost to the gap when a Concordat cruiser appeared on her sensors. It was not one of the patrol vessels. It was something much larger, and it had jumped in from a completely unexpected vector. The battle fleet was arriving early. The cruiser locked onto the Wanderer and began to close, its weapons charging with a glow that Una could see, even at this distance. Dowan's ship was too far away to intercept, and she was still 30 seconds from the gap in the sensor net. She was going to die. She realized with sudden clarity, not in the darkness of space with the pack she had saved, not in a blaze of glory against impossible odds, but in the cold calculations of a targeting computer. that saw her as nothing more than a problem to be solved. Then she felt something warm press against her back. Siora had somehow made her way from the cargo hold to the cockpit, squeezing her massive frame through spaces that should not have been large enough. The alpha female pressed her head against Yuna's shoulder, making that low rumbling sound that meant comfort, meant safety, meant you are not alone. Yuna felt tears streaming down her face, but her hand stayed steady on the controls. If she was going to die, she was going to die trying. She pushed the engines past their limits, feeling the ship shake around her, hearing alarms that she ignored because they did not matter anymore. The cruiser was almost in weapons range. She could see the targeting lasers painting her hull, could feel the Wanderer's shields straining against the incoming fire. And then she had an idea. It was desperate and stupid, and it would probably destroy her ship. But it was the only chance she had. She reversed the polarity on her engine core and vented every bit of waste heat the Wanderer had been accumulating since they left QM7. The thermal bloom was massive, a burst of energy that overwhelmed the cruiser's sensors and filled its targeting systems with garbage data for 5 precious seconds. They were blind. Yuna dove for the gap in the sensor net, threading her battered ship through a space that seemed impossibly narrow. The Wanderer scraped against one of the detection buoys, sending sparks flying across her view screen. But she was through. She punched the hyperspace coordinates for the nearest human colony and hit the jump. Drive the stars stretched into lines around her. And then they were gone, leaving the Concordat fleet behind in a flash of light in the cargo hold. The Vorak howled with triumph in the cockpit. Siora pressed closer to Yuna, and Yuna wrapped her arms around the alpha female's massive neck and sobbed with relief. They had made it. They were free. But Yuna knew that the real challenge was still ahead. She was bringing the galaxy's most dangerous predators to a human colony, and she had no idea how they would be received. She could only hope that her people would see what she had seen, would understand what she had come to understand. The Vorak were not monsters. They were survivors, just like the humans who had taken to the stars.